Hello YouTube, Chocobilly here with another deck profile, and this week I'm going to be looking at the Frozen and Cracked Earth. It's a little construction of my own design, which I've played a few times now and is a lot of fun. It can definitely, in the right matchup, get screwed, but in a lot of matchups it does really, really well. So let's dive into it. So first up, it is 18 forwards, 17 backups, and 15 summons. And as you can already tell, it's a very heavily focused Shiva deck. Now, the reason I've gone into Earth Ice is for one card and one card only, and that card is Rydia from Opus 15. And as you can tell, all the summons are 2 CP or less, and Rydia, when she comes in, gives herself 2 counters, which means that she can cast a summon of 2 CP or less right off the bat. And that's the idea behind this, is that there aren't any 4 characters outside of Teller, the backup, to be able to give her additional counters, but they are not necessary. You never need to pay attention to it, aside from your opponent potentially finding ways to remove the counters. But yeah, it means that as soon as Rydia comes onto the field, she can immediately cast any of the summons, or I say immediately, provided that her own entry ability is allowed to resolve. But she can ultimately cast any of the Shivas for free. And I think that is incredibly powerful. And then obviously a few of the Shivas really like to capitalize on the fact that you have lots of Shivas in your break zone, especially the Opus 15 Shiva. And that card, when you have 6 Shivas in the break zone, is incredibly powerful. You can dull and freeze 2 of your opponent's forwards and make them discard 2 cards for 1 CP. And you know, that's with Rydia, it's 0 CP, so super, super efficient. Then I've also thrown in the likes of the Opus 15 Terra as well, because when she enters, reveal cards from, or reveal however many summons you want from your hand, dull and freeze as many characters on your opponent's field for that, and then every time you cast a summon, you get to either dull or freeze both a forward and a backup as well. And with 15 summons in your deck, I mean, there's a good chance you could play Terra onto the field just in your backups and reveal 5 cards and dull out or dull and freeze all your opponent's backups. You know, all their, maybe they've got 3 backups and a couple of forwards. Dull and freeze everything. It's just so incredibly powerful. Anyway, let's get into the nitty-gritty and discuss each of the forwards. So first up, we have Black Waltz 3 from Opus 11. So it's not particularly massive forward, but it's got a lot of really decent effects when it dies, and the chances are you're most of the time going to be going for get an ice summon out of your break zone, because that's what the deck revolves around. But ultimately it can block a 10k attacker, because when he dies he can deal 7k to a dull forward as well, which is pretty decent in and of itself. Or if you just really want to make your opponent discard a card, maybe they don't have many cards already and you can just reduce the hand size even more if you've got lots of cards in the hand. It might also be a case that you just haven't got your summons in the break zone yet. Either way, it's got a nice collection of abilities for when it dies, and it's also one of those horrible forwards where your opponent doesn't want to attack, because when it blocks, because as the Black Waltz 3 does, it's gonna do something nasty regardless. Rydia. So, as I mentioned, she has an incredible effect, and you don't need to worry about how many counters she has on her. Now, I am only running 2 Rydias. The main reason for that being is the fact that if you run 3, the chances of you getting your hand stifled goes up. Now, you are only running 18 forwards in this deck, and there are definitely forwards in this particular setup which you could switch out for another Rydia. But I just find that having that constant flow of more forwards, or just getting more summons to hand, and not having your hand stifled is better. Yes, you would have more Rydias in hand to be able to play her when she eventually dies, or, you know, whatever. Ultimately though, if your opponent, say, has the ability to lock down Rydia, remove her counters, and then just never kill her, you've then got 2 more Rydias which you can't do anything with. Rather than having more Rydias, I've found other ways of being able to play her onto the field, or just get her from your break zone, so that way you've got a bit more of a kind of cycling of the cards. But either way, she's incredibly strong, can cast summons for free. I mean, like I said, every single summon in this deck can be cast for free, and it's just disgustingly good. Next we've got Kryl. So she can cast a summon from either yours or your opponent's break zone for free, provided you obviously have to pay the cost. So I don't know why I said free for, but you know what I mean. And then you can dull and pay 1 to then choose a summon from your break zone and cast that. Also, again, either your opponent or your break zone, and cast it. Now, most of the summons are going to be 1 or 2 CP, so the chances are you don't have to pay that much anyway. or you can be casting a summon from your opponent's break zone as well. Now, the one thing to be mindful of is the fact that you really want a lot of your summons in the break zone. So the chances are you aren't really going to be wanting to use Kryl's ability unless you either really need to maybe break a troublesome forward, or, you know, for a final game push. But either way, being able to cast that summon, or just cast a summon from your opponent's break zone just to get it removed, is still really, really efficient, and to be honest, not a bad play. Beneal. Now, this is a card that never gets any play, and there's a good reason behind it. She's not particularly very good. She is basically a monster, but even easier to kill. Can't attack, can't block, but does gain a counter at the end of every turn, and if you get 2 counters, you can get a forward from your break zone out of your hand. With 4 counters, you can play that onto the field. Now, the chances of Beneal actually getting this off are pretty slim, but most times I've played this card, it does get to 2 counters, at which point you get a card back to hand. There are cards that do it better, but not quite as cheaply. So if she just sits there ticking away, and you've got something like Charlotte on the field where they have to target Charlotte first, or there are more troublesome forwards, she can just eventually get to 4 counters, and then all of a sudden when the forward that they're focusing on dies, use Beneal, bring it back onto the field. And it also works excellently with something like maybe Boonuvels or Titan, where you can just play it onto the field, something super big that's just going to board wipe or just be really troublesome for your opponent. Your opponent invests a lot in killing these forwards, and use Beneal to bring it back. But like I said, she isn't great, and she can't attack, can't block, so she's effectively a monster. But you know, one of the reasons I built this deck is just to try out some new things, try some cards I don't really often play. And Beneal never really put much work in, to be honest, but I like her. And, you know, I'm always drawn to these weird and janky cards, and I enjoy playing with her. Levnato. So, 15 summons in your deck, the chances are you're going to have more than a couple in hand, and when Levnato enters the field, you may reveal any number of summons from your hand. When you reveal no summons, put Levnato into break zone, so that sucks. But when you reveal 2 or more summons, choose one dull forward, break it. Chances are you're going to have more than 2 summons in hand, or at least 2 summons in hand, so Levnato is going to get to kill something. The one problem is getting the forward to be dull in the first place, but, you know, there are ways to casting something like the Dulling Shiva, or using something like Scholar to dull it out, but ultimately, you know, your opponent attacks, you take the point damage, the following turn you play Levnato, break that forward, and having an outright break in this deck is pretty important, because of the fact that so many of the Shivas deal damage. You've got that covered, but having an outright break is really essential. Having a very summon heavy deck is really, really useful. White Tiger Sea Nimbus, just because he's a fantastic card in Ice Earth. Enters, dull and freeze a character, so your backups, monsters, whatever, but also on the attack as well. He's massive, he has Brave, I don't really need to say much more than that. He's just a standard, really good card, and something that this deck lacks a little bit is big, powerful forwards. So having something big like that, just problematic for your opponent in the way. Dulling and freezing everything on attack, they need to address this. But when you've got, you've got Rydia, Charlotte, White Tiger, Sea Nimbus on the field, they have 3 really problematic forwards that they have to get rid of Charlotte first before they can, and then they have to invest a lot even to get rid of White Tiger, Sea or Rydia, because they've got their own forms of protection or just generally quite big. Terra. So yeah, again, lots of summons in this deck, so you can easily be playing Terra onto the field, reveal even a couple of summons, you dull and freeze 2 things, and then you cast a summon, you then get to dull and freeze either or both a forward and a backup, and that's dull or freeze, sorry. And that alone is super strong, but when you're combining this with something like the Shiva, which dulls 2 forwards, you then get to dull a forward and then freeze that forward using Terra, and then freeze a backup, and 9 times out of 10 when you're casting a summon, you're probably going to find that your opponent's got a dull backup anyway. So again, really, really strong card. And then if you potentially have something like Une on the field, now I do only have 1 Une in the deck, I'll talk more about her later, but if you've got Une on the field, let's say you play Terra onto the field, dull and freeze 3 characters, then cast a summon, and, I don't know, dull or freeze another backup or forward. You flicker Terra using Une. You now reveal 2 summons. You get to dull and freeze 2 more things. You have dull and frozen out like 7 things, which is just... all you've done is pay, what, 4 for Terra and maybe 0 for the summon because you've got Rydia on the field. Just a fantastic way to be able to just freeze out your opponent's entire board. Titan, because Titan, you need those board wipes, and like I said, you've got pretty much damage dealing covered with the summons, so you're gonna need ways to break forwards, and Titan is a great way to do this. Also, he deals opponent damage if you get to break 5 things. Now the problem with this is obviously it's going to break a lot of your forwards, and it will include things like Rydia and Charlotte, your main forms of protection, but when needs must, you have to get rid of your opponent's board. Again, potentially playable off of Beneal if she has 4 counters, which would be quite funny, but it also synergizes nicely with something like Black Waltz, because he gets put into the break zone. You then maybe get another summon to hand, or you get to make your opponent discard a card. So yeah, there are a little bit of synergies there as well. Again, it wouldn't kill White Tiger as well, so maybe you've got White Tiger, your opponent's got a couple of big forwards, you play Titan, you break your opponent's forwards, but you don't break your own. Nice. Finally, in the forwards, Beneals. Again, just another forward that I was kind of drawn to because I don't really play it often, but actually there is some method behind my madness. So for every the cost required to cast Beneals is reduced by 2 for each backup of a different element you control other than multi-element. So let's say hypothetically I've got 2 ice backups and Shantoto down. Shantoto is multi-element, so will not count towards the cost reduction. So at that point, Beneals would cost 8. But any other earth backup down, then Beneals costs you 6, which is the idea. And at damage 3, it gains Brave and can attack twice in the same turn. That, when you've frozen out your opponent's board, is scary. But then, Beneals at damage 6, when it attacks, choose 1 character, break it. So you get to break 2 characters, provided Beneals can attack twice. That, when you've locked down your opponent's board, is scary, because ultimately, let's say you've frozen out their backups, you attack a Beneals, break one of their forwards. Now, do they block and probably sack off their other forward, or do they take damage and then Beneals attacks again, breaks that forward? It's a horrible situation for them to be in, and Beneals, I think even if you are getting to, even in a mono deck, playing Beneals for 8 CP, I don't think it's the worst card. Now, it doesn't have an immediate entry ability, and that's one of the reasons that doesn't get played. But for 6 CP to potentially be at damage 6 to break things, whew. Now you need to be careful, obviously, because ultimately, if you're at damage 6, you're very much on the back foot. But this deck actually doesn't mind taking damage, letting your opponent just overwhelm you, because it's not hard for you to then push back and actually break things like Titan and casting the Shivas, which are super cheap, to then just, wipe their board. Right, next on to the backups, Black Mage. 2 ice, dull, put Black Mage into the break zone, choose 1 ice summon in your break zone, add to your hand. Pretty standard. Maybe you've got a lot of Shivas there and you want that specific Shiva that deals a lot of damage. Get that Shiva back to hand, cast it for free using Rydia. And even if you don't cast it for free, doesn't matter because they're all super cheap. Scholar. Love this card. I think I've talked about this card a few times now, but dull, choose 1 forward, dull it. You can choose his ability. You can only use his ability if you cast summon this turn. If you've got Rydia, the summon was cast for free, so all you're doing is paying 1 CP to have cast a big summon, which is probably breaking something, or dulling freezing something, or making your opponent discard, and then you get to dull something else as well. And like I said earlier, this card combined with Terror, really, really good, because let's say you cast a summon for free using Rydia, and you've got Terror on the field, you then get to freeze your opponent's forward, freeze a backup, and then using Scholar, you get to dull the forward that was frozen. So now that forward is dull and frozen, and it's just, you can have a couple of these on the field, you cast a summon for free, maybe dull out 2 forwards using the earlier Shiva, and then dull 2 Scholars, dull 4, or dull 2 more forwards, so 4 forwards dulled. Really great for an endgame push, but just combining this with the ability to freeze forwards with Terror is strong and won me a fair few games, to be honest. Teller. So, the only 4 card in this deck that can actually push Rydia above 2 more counters, but that doesn't matter because we're not running that many summons. But he's an EX which can get you a summon from your break zone back into your hand, which is really good. And he does have a dull and discard 1 summon ability to deal 3k for each CP required to cast a discarded summon. At best, you're going to be dealing 6k, which isn't great. But I have legitimately used it once where I've used this, discarded a 2 CP Shiva to deal 6k to a forward that couldn't take damage from summons but could from abilities. So then you can combine that with maybe something else like Black Waltz to hopefully kill something even bigger. And, at the end of the day, it's choose 1 dull forward at 3k damage for each CP required. So you may be killing your own summon, killing your own Black Waltz to then deal a bit more damage or make your own discard or something like that. There's other ways that you can use Teller, but ultimately he's in here just because he's an EX burst that gets your summons back to your hand. Une. I only run 1 of in this deck, but ultimately it's just a nice to have. Let's say you get to 4 backups and your opponent's kind of, maybe they're bricking a little bit, or you've managed to kind of dull and freeze everything and they can't really do much. Play Une, and then let's think of all the cards that you can cast for free. Oh, sorry. Let's think of all the cards that benefit from being re-triggered. So, Rydia. Now, this might sound like a strange one, but let's say you cast a summon for free. You then flick a Rydia. Rydia comes back in. She gains 2 more counters. You can now cast another summon for free, because technically it's not the same Rydia. So you can use her ability to pay 0, cast a summon for free. Again. And if you've got something like Shiva already on the field, if you've got something like Terra already on the field, you get to trigger her twice, which is disgusting. Then you've got something like Levnato. Let's say you broke a forward, you then cast a summon, flicker Levnato, choose another dull forward, break that forward, again, really good. Shiva Titan potentially. There's just so many good cards, there's so many good entry abilities in this deck that Une can trigger off of, but the one problem is the fact that Une will become very much a focus on your opponent, and they will probably try to break it if they can. That's why it's only one of. It's just nice to have. If you see the opportunity to play it onto the field, might as well, because at the very least you're probably going to be doing some horrible stuff to your opponent's deck. Lael, again, just because it's Lael. A lot of these cards are here just because they're standard good cards, to be honest. And Lael, being able to protect your forwards, yeah, that's why, really. It protects maybe your Une from something like Alexander to break it, or protecting your Rydia. It's just a form of protection, or maybe they're trying to cancel your summon using something like, I don't know, Mist Dragon. Either way, it's just a good way to be able to protect your cards and your interactions. Banger, so another way to be able to retrieve stuff from your break zone. So maybe you want to get your Rydia back or something like that, but if you need to, just play him as a turn 1, just 2 CP. Doesn't do anything on entry, but later in the game, maybe you've broken your Teller, you play Banger to then get yourself maybe Levnato back to hand. Oh, sorry, choose one Earth character in your break zone to get yourself maybe, yeah, an Earth character back to hand. It doesn't really matter what. Titan, just for that board wipe, whatever. It's just a pretty decent recursion. Alchemist, just more kind of consistency, really. So Alchemist, just reveal an ice card, and again, ice is pretty much the majority of the deck anyway, so the chances are you're going to hit one fairly early on, but it doesn't really matter because it gets you an ice summon to hand, that's great, gets you an ice backup, that's great, gets you an ice forward. Like I said, they're all really, really good, and all with decent entry effects. So Alchemist, just a bit more consistency, and it will just scare your opponent because what you're getting into hand is going to screw with them. Minor, gets your backup back to hand, so maybe you have broken your Teller, but you want to get him back to hand, so you can replay him to get an ice backup back to hand. A bit of a roundabout way of doing it, but still not the worst. And similarly, Minor can also be put into the break zone to then get yourself something like Rydia or Charlotte back to hand just for that protection. Shantoto, because it's Shantoto. Maybe your opponent's got an answer to your Titan or your summons or something like that. Either way, just a board reset. Yeah, and the reason I run 2 Shantotos is because one will go to damage. So yeah, Shantoto. Right, time for the summons. So Shiva, dull 2 forwards opponent controls. Or yeah, just cast it. I mean, you get to dull 2 forwards. If you want to use a Scholar backup, that's now a 3rd forward dulled. You cast it with something like Terra on the field. You then get to freeze one of those forwards as well, and then freeze a backup. Just perfectly fine, to be honest. So there are a couple of Shivas in here which I've kind of shoehorned in just because they're low in cost, but ultimately aren't amazing. So yeah, choose one dull forward, deal it 6k damage. If your opponent has received 5 damage or more, deal it 9k damage instead, which, if you're applying the pressure, is really, really good. 1 CP EX to potentially deal 9 to one of your opponent's forwards is really strong. Now, the one problem with this is obviously your opponent has to have a dull forward to be able to deal the damage too. But even then, a lot of people run a lot of smaller forwards these days that have efficient abilities. Just being able to get rid of that forward potentially is quite good. And again, choose one dull forward, not one dull forward your opponent controls, so you could potentially use that on your own Blackwald to then make your opponent discard or something like that. This Shiva, so choose one dull forward, do 10k damage minus 1000 damage for each card in your opponent's hand. So if you want to take this deck in a more of a discard oriented focus, so maybe you start running things like Orphan or just whatever you want to go mono ice, this is a really good card. But what I found with this card actually is 9 times out of 10, I was always averaging about 7 or 8 damage on 7 or 8k, sorry, on a forward because your opponent was having to play stuff out of hand or pay for stuff out of hand because you've frozen their backups. So realistically, you're kind of screwing their efficiency regardless. So they have to discard things to play things, at which point they have no cards in hand, and this Shiva will actually end up dealing quite a bit of damage. Yeah, I mean, choose one dull forward, deal it 6k damage and 1000 more for each card named Shiva in your break zone. So yeah, you're gonna just off the bat be dealing lots of damage. Even as an EX burst, 7k for 2 CP, not bad at all. But, you know, I easily hit 10k, 11k, even 15k with this Shiva sometimes. So yeah, just really efficient. Cast it for free with Shiva, with Rydia, sorry. Deal 10k to a forward. Jesus. And the star of the show. So the Opus 15 Shiva. Choose one forward and up to one other forward is dull the former. If you have 2 or more card named Shiva in your break zone, also dull the latter. If you have 4 or more, also freeze them. If you have 6 or more, also your opponent discards 2 cards from their hand. So yeah, if you pay 1 CP to dull and freeze 2 forwards and make your opponent discard 2 cards, that's rank. You do that for free with Rydia, that's even worse. You do that for free with Terror on the field, we get to dull and freeze more things. Oh boy, it's just such a good card. And some people look at this and go, oh, actually, you know, you have to get like 6 into the break zone though. When you're running 15, that's nearly a third of your deck. So it's not going to be hard for that to happen. And ultimately, even if you're paying 1 CP just to dial 2 forwards, that's perfectly fine, to be honest. You do that just dulling 1 forward with Shiva, I keep saying Shiva, with Terror on the field, where you get to freeze that forward as well, and then potentially freeze it back up, or just dull it, whatever. You know, it doesn't matter. It's not hard for this card to hit its ability. And what's more is that when you have 6 Shivas in your break zone and they're not in the break zone and you haven't seen them yet, your opponent becomes super scared of attacking because you hit that as an EX burst, dull and freeze 2 forwards and discard 2 without a response. Awful. Yeah, I can't get my words out, but yeah. Having to discard 2 cards when you can't respond to them, maybe cast something or do something, is just the worst feeling, which obviously makes me sound like a bit of a dick because, you know, I'm the one running this deck, but it was just a lot of fun and it's not hard to hit this card's prerequisites. Right, let's move on to some honourable mentions. There are definitely some forwards which I would take out of this deck, namely something like Beneal or Beneal, and there are maybe some better backups you could be running in place of something like Une or Scholar, but ultimately I enjoyed the way this deck ran, to be honest, and those cards did pose a threat, but here are some really good cards that work with them anyway. So, a slightly bigger Shiva. So, as I said, you can't, well, aside from playing Teller onto the field once Rydia is down, you're probably going to be paying for this out of hand, unless you want to take this deck in a different vein. I mean, it could be a case that you are just going a bit more full focused, having some more 4 cards in there to make so that Rydia wants to get some more counters, or it could just be a case of you're happy to play this out of hand. Either way, choose one dull forward, break it. The cost to cast Shiva was paid with CP of 3 or more elements. Your opponent discards 1 card from the hand. In this deck, that's actually possible if you are running something like Shantoto. Maybe you have Tyro in there as well. Ultimately, you can have multiple elements and use Shiva to make your opponent discard a card as well. But again, having another break ability, really good. Deleter. So when Deleter enters the field, select one of the 2 following actions. Select one character you control, break it, or choose one character cost 2 less in your break zone, add it to your hand. So you could potentially break your own Black Waltz if you want to make your opponent discard a card, or, you know, there's a lot of good 2 CP characters in this deck that you want to get back to hand. So namely Rydia, but then potentially Charlotte as well, or maybe you just want to get another backup back to hand, maybe another Deleter, who knows. But again, he's another good Ice Earth card. Just be wary because obviously you do need to pay the 2 correct elements for him, and he isn't particularly strong as a forward either, so yeah, be mindful of that. But, you know, you could always use him to break your Shantoto as well, so then you can recast another Shantoto. So there's another means to end. Summoner, so a slightly it's like a better version, or not better version, a bigger version of Black Mage. So it does cost you 3 CP, but you pay 1 and dull, put Summoner into the break zone, choose up to 2 ice summons in your break zone, add them to your hand. Your opponent sees this card and they are going to really worry, especially when you've got lots of Shiva in the break zone. So yeah, ultimately just being able to have that there, and realistically the cost is actually the same as the Black Mage, because you do have to pay 2 ice to use it, and it's only a 2 CP, so a total of 4 CP to be paid. But this one can be paid, its ability can be paid with any or CP of any color, but it does cost you a bit more initially. But I still think it's probably worth it, and yeah, being able to get those summons back to hand to then cast another one for free and then maybe cast one more, just really, really good. Orphan. So as I mentioned before, maybe you want to go a bit more discard heavy, so take out something like Beneal or maybe Boonavels and place Orphan in there instead, just to, you know, every time you go to combat, your opponent then has to discard a card, they get to dull something out, you can then freeze it using one of your summons or using Terror. You know, there's so many good ways to be able to do this. And then Orphan also poses your opponent with another problem, because let's say you have something like Rydia, Terror, and then you play Orphan on the field. Which one do they go for first? Because they are all horrible, horrible cards to face off. And finally, Snow. Yeah, to be honest, I'd probably play Snow in place of Une, just because of the fact that some of the forwards in this deck are small, something like Rydia or Charlotte. Even with Charlotte's got a damage 3, you know, being able to push past a forward that you can dull out and then use it to be able to become frozen with Terror or some other means is just really good. And being able to just apply that a bit more attacking pressure, because one of the things this deck struggled with a little bit was being able to actually attack. Once you dull and freeze everything out, that's fine, but that only lasts for so long, so you need to start applying the pressure as early as possible. So using something like Snow to be able to actually get past those annoying forwards that are quite big would be very useful. And then, you know, even if the forward isn't going to become frozen, you can then target it with the Shivas to then break them. Even if you're casting a couple of Shivas, the smaller Shivas are dealing 6k, as long as you're dealing 2 instances of 6k, that's really not the worst in my opinion. And there we have it, folks. Yeah, like I said, I've run this deck a few times now, and it's really, really fun, and tends to work pretty efficiently. With things like Alchemist and Miner to be able to get things back to hand or find things out of your deck to then keep playing them. And again, the good thing is with the summons as well is the fact that it doesn't matter if you're discarding them, because that's also where you want them to be. And even if it's the summons you'd rather have in hand to be casting because of the Shivas in the break zone, something like Kryl can still play them. So there's lots of good efficiency here. Again, with Teller, you can get things back to hand using Terror to then be able to... I never realized how similar their names are. Using things like Terror and Teller, just be able to get stuff back to hand, freezing things out. Just really, really fun. Let me know what changes you'd make to this deck. I think there's some really cool combos in this deck, and something like Boonavels that doesn't get played much I think could be fun. But what cards would you replace, or how would you change it up? Maybe you change the Shivas, maybe, who knows? Anyway, thank you so much for watching, guys. I really appreciate it. Stay safe, be lucky, and I'll see you in the next video.